The sniper range went silent when she set down her Barrett .50. Men snickered, some whispering she was playing soldier, but the laughter died when her spotter revealed the truth. She wasn't just another recruit, she was the woman who held the world's 3,247-meter confirmed kill record. The desert range was alive with noise. Brass casings clinked on the ground, rifles cracked in steady rhythm, and the dry wind carried the smell of gunpowder across the training grounds. A line of soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder, their rifles resting on bipods, scopes trained on distant targets. Then she arrived. She carried the rifle almost casually, though it weighed nearly 30 pounds. The long, dark frame of the Barrett .50 caught the sun and seemed to drag every pair of eyes toward her. A few soldiers nudged each other, smirks spreading before the first words were even spoken. "Look at that," one whispered, "loud enough to carry. She's gonna break her shoulder before she hits anything." Another chuckled, "That cannon's bigger than she is." The laughter rippled down the line. It wasn't cruel in the way of bullies, it was worse. It was the dismissive kind, the kind soldiers used when they'd already decided someone didn't belong. She ignored it. With calm steps, she moved to the far end of the range and set the Barrett down on the mat. The weapon looked monstrous compared to the standard rifles on either side. The recoil alone was enough to intimidate even seasoned shooters. She adjusted the bipod legs, brushed sand from the optics, and lay prone with practiced ease. The instructor, a grizzled man with a voice like gravel, called out the next drill. Targets at various ranges: 200, 400, 800 meters. Standard qualification stuff. Nothing unusual, but the murmurs wouldn't stop. "She can't even zero that thing. She flinch before she pulls the trigger. Better hope the scope doesn't knock her out cold." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the noise fade. Her breathing slowed. In her mind, she wasn't on a noisy training range surrounded by skeptics. She was back in a high valley, mountain winds tearing at her ghillie suit, waiting through 48 hours of silence for a single fleeting shot. The instructor barked, "Ready up." The soldiers shouldered their rifles. She rapped her cheek against the stock of the Barrett, her hands steady, her movements precise. The first volley cracked down the line, rifles firing in quick succession. Dust clouds burst around the targets. Steel rang. A few shots went wide. She hadn't fired yet. The pause drew more laughter. What's she waiting for? Scared already? She ignored them again, making minute adjustments to the scope. Wind speed, mirage, humidity. Even at just a few hundred meters, these things mattered. She adjusted elevation, dialed the turret, and only then touched a trigger. The Barrett thundered. The sound was different, deeper, heavier, commanding. It rolled across the range like a drumbeat of war. Soldiers flinched despite themselves, and the steel target rang dead center. The laughter faltered. She worked the bolt, chambering another round with mechanical precision. Another shot roared. Another perfect hit. The Barrett kicked like a mule, but she absorbed it, her body rolling naturally with the recoil. Shot after shot, the distant targets fell silent under her fire. By the time the drill ended, she had outshot every man on the line, but the smirks weren't gone yet. Not completely. Some of the soldiers muttered excuses, brushing it off as luck. Others whispered that the real test wasn't 800 meters, it was much farther, almost impossibly farther, and soon they would set that test. The murmurs had not stopped. If anything, her flawless shooting had only fueled the doubters. Soldiers leaned together, trading theories like gamblers trying to explain away a lucky streak. "Yeah, okay, maybe she can handle the recoil," one muttered, "beginner's luck." Another smirked, "She won't last at distance. Nobody gets that lucky twice." The instructor, sensing the tension building, decided to up the stakes. He barked orders, and a team of assistants began setting up the next phase of the test. Instead of the standard steel silhouettes scattered across the field, a single plate was dragged farther and farther away, beyond the 800-meter line, past 1,000, then farther still. The chatter quieted as the target kept moving. Most shooters rarely trained past a kilometer, and even then, few hit consistently. The further the assistants carried the plate, the more the soldiers exchanged nervous glances. "Sir," one finally called, "that's way out there." The instructor's lips curled into something between a grin and a dare. "To miles, nearly 3,200 meters. Anyone here thinks they've got what it takes, prove it." The words hung in the air like a challenge meant for legends. At that distance, a bullet's flight wasn't just about trigger control or crosshairs. It was math, science, and patience, married together in a single breath. The Earth's rotation, the Coriolis effect, had to be factored. Wind gusts shifted direction at different points along the flight path. Even the heat rising from the desert floor could bend the round off course. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. No one spoke up, and then she did. "I'll take it." Head snapped her way. A few chuckles burst out immediately, sharp and mocking. "No chance, come on, this is serious. She's about to humiliate herself." The instructor's eyes narrowed, but he didn't dismiss her. Instead, he gestured to the far-off speck of steel shimmering in the desert heat. "Fine, you get one shot, miss, and you pack up." She nodded once. No hesitation. Lying prone again, she began the meticulous process of preparation. The Barrett lay steady in her arms, but she knew the rifle was only half the equation. Her hands moved with quiet certainty, adjusting the scope, dialing elevation, noting the flags that marked shifting winds along the range. The soldiers gathered behind her, their skepticism now blended with curiosity. A miss was expected, a hit. That would defy everything they believed about her. "Look at her," one whispered. "She's not even sweating." "Yeah, because she doesn't know what she's doing," another replied, though his voice lacked conviction. She breathed slowly, deeply. The world shrank to the space between her eye and the target. In her mind, she was back on a ridge overseas, body pressed into the dirt, scope trained on a compound miles away. She remembered the hours of stillness, the way time itself seemed to freeze as she calculated angles, wind, and drop. The instructor finally broke the silence. "Shooter ready." Her voice was calm. "Ready." The line of soldiers leaned forward, every one of them waiting for her to follow to rewrite everything they thought they knew. Her finger brushed the trigger. The Barrett roared again, louder than before, a thunderclap that seemed to shake the air itself. The muzzle blast kicked up a cloud of sand. The bullet streaked invisibly across the desert, a supersonic ghost on a path that would take seconds to complete. Every man held his breath. The target was so far that silence stretched unnaturally, a gulf of anticipation where the outcome balanced on the edge of doubt and destiny. Then, faint but undeniable, the steel rang. A perfect hit. The moment the steel rang, disbelief rippled across the range. "No way." One soldier muttered. "That's impossible. She couldn't have." But the sound was real. A sharp, echoing clang carried back across the desert. Undeniable proof that her bullet had traveled more than 3 kilometers and struck its mark. She didn't gloat. She didn't even look at them. Calmly, she cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent casing with a metallic clink. To her, the shot wasn't a miracle. It was math. It was training. It was memory burned into her bones. Lying behind the Barrett, she adjusted her scope again. The desert heat shimmered in waves, warping the horizon. Wind tugged at her hair, and she tilted her head slightly, feeling its strength. Most shooters glanced at wind flags. She listened to it like an old friend whispering secrets. The soldiers behind her were still murmuring, unable to comprehend. One finally broke the silence. Fluke had to be. No one does that twice. She exhaled slowly, as if their words didn't exist. For her, every shot was a meditation. She remembered Afghanistan the night she lay motionless for 36 hours, waiting for the high-value target to step into the open. She remembered the patience, the way her heartbeat slowed until it matched the rhythm of the earth. When the shot finally came, she hadn't felt excitement, only certainty. That was her calm now. Her spotter, a quiet man who had been watching silently until now, crouched beside her. He didn't offer corrections, didn't feed her numbers. He knew she didn't need them. Instead, he simply whispered, same as before. She adjusted for the slight wind shift, dialed the elevation, then settled into position. The Barrett was heavy, but it moved like an extension of her own body. Her breathing slowed. Inhale, exhale, pause. She squeezed the trigger. Another thunderous boom split the air. Again, the soldiers held their breath. Seconds dragged like minutes. Then the steel rang again. Even clearer this time. The silence that followed was heavier than any laughter. One soldier swore under his breath. Another shook his head, muttering, That's not luck. That's something else." She worked the bolt once more, chambering another round, her face impassive. To her, the shots weren't about proving herself. They were simply proof of discipline. Years of training, endless calculations, the will to outlast doubt. Her calmness unnerved them more than the hits themselves. Most shooters, after pulling off a miracle, would grin or fist pump. She remained still, serene. It was as though she had expected nothing less. The instructor finally stepped forward, folding his arms. His voice carried authority, but even he couldn't mask the edge of respect creeping in. "Shooter, state your name." She glanced up at him, her eyes steady, voice quiet but strong. "Sergeant Alyssa Ward." A few soldiers blinked. The name meant nothing yet, but soon it would, because the next words wouldn't come from her. They'd come from the man who knew exactly who she was. and what she had done. The range had gone still. No more jokes, no more dismissive laughter. Every man who had mocked her now stood silent, their eyes fixed on the woman lying steady behind the Barrett .50. But Alyssa Ward wasn't finished. The instructor raised his hand. "Reset the target," he barked. The assistants dragged the steel plate back, angling it slightly, making it even harder to see through the mirage shimmering above the desert floor. It was no longer just distance, it was invisibility. The kind of shot where even the best faltered. A soldier muttered, "That's unfair." Another replied under his breath, "No one's hitting that. No one except her." Alyssa shifted, adjusting her body into a perfect prone alignment. She didn't waste time looking at the others. Their opinions were background noise, irrelevant compared to the rhythm of the wind and the weight of her breathing. Her spotter crouched beside her again, scanning the far horizon through binoculars. He didn't need to say much. He knew she was already processing everything: the drop, the drift, the shifting gusts in the valley. "Still," he murmured, "quarter left at 2 clicks. Mirage heavy." She nodded slightly, dialing her scope, her fingers moving with precision. Each adjustment was tiny, almost invisible, but to her it was the difference between failure and perfection. The soldiers gathered closer, a crowd now, all eyes on her. Some folded their arms, still stubborn in disbelief. Others leaned forward, anticipation etched across their faces. The air buzzed with tension. Then silence. Alyssa, single quotes as breathing slowed. Again, inhale, exhale, pause. Her heart rate dropped, every beat measured. The scope settled on the faint shimmer where the target waited. Her finger caressed the trigger. The Barrett roared. The blast was violent, concussive, a wave of thunder that rolled across the range. Sand and dust kicked into the air. The bullet was invisible, but every man followed its imagined path, their minds racing to predict the impossible. 1 second, 2, 3. Clang. The sound was distant but unmistakable. Steel had been struck again. A ripple moved through the crowd. Gasps, curses, disbelief. One soldier dropped his cap, staring wide-eyed at the horizon. Another simply shook his head, whispering, That's not even human." But Alyssa didn't react. She cycled the bolt.com as ever, the spent casing tumbling to the dirt. To her, the shot wasn't glory. It was muscle memory, science, patience, discipline. The instructor finally broke the silence, his gravelly voice carrying weight. "You realize what you just did?" She said nothing. Her spotter answered instead, his voice calm, but carrying the weight of a bombshell. "She's done it before, overseas. That was no accident." The soldiers turned to him, confusion written on their faces. "What do you mean?" one asked. A spotter lowered his binoculars and looked at them evenly. "She holds the kill record, 3,247 meters, confirmed. That's why none of this surprises her." The words hit harder than the Barrett's recoil. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some cursed in disbelief. Others glanced at Alyssa with something new in their eyes. Not mockery, not doubt, but awe. The instructor gave her a long, measured look. His earlier skepticism burned away. Slowly he nodded once, and just like that, the range wasn't the same anymore. The woman they had laughed at had revealed herself as a legend. The air around the range had changed. A few minutes ago it had been full of smug laughter and whispered jokes. Now, it was thick with silence and uneasy quiet that carried more weight than any gunshot. Alyssa remained prone behind the Barrett, the barrel cooling, her cheeks still resting on the stock. To her, nothing had changed. She had done what she always did: calculate, breathe, fire. But to everyone else, the ground had shifted beneath their feet. The soldiers who had mocked her now stood awkwardly, unsure where to look. Some kept their eyes on the sand. Others stared at her with the disbelief of men who had just watched gravity break. One finally spoke. "Wait, you're telling me she's the one?" The record shot. His voice cracked halfway through, as though the words were too heavy to carry. Her spotter answered with calm certainty. 3,247 meters. Afghanistan cross-valley shot. High-value target. Confirmed kill. Nobody's beaten it since. The murmurs grew louder. Heads turned. Jaws tightened. Some of the men looked at Alyssa with awe. Others looked at her with something sharper: shame. Shame for having laughed. Shame for having dismissed her without ever knowing who she was. The instructor broke through the noise with a sharp bark. "Enough." His eyes locked on Alyssa. He studied her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Finally, he asked the only question that mattered. "Why didn't you tell them?" Alyssa lifted her head, finally meeting his gaze. Her voice was steady, low, and without an ounce of pride. "Because legends don't pull the trigger. Soldiers do. I'd rather they see me as a shooter than a story." The words cut through the silence like a blade. No one laughed this time. One of the younger soldiers, one who had been the loudest, earlier shifted uncomfortably before speaking. We thought you were just trying to look tough. We didn't know," Alyssa interrupted softly. "You never asked." The truth stung more than any insult. The soldiers looked at one another, realizing how quickly they had judged her, how easily they had dismissed her worth based on appearances. Her spotter stepped forward, his voice carrying weight. "You all saw what she can do. But don't think it's just about the record. That shot overseas, she had one chance to protect an entire convoy pinned down in a valley. That bullet wasn't for fame. It was for lives." Images filled the soldiers, mind-strapped men, ambushed, waiting for a miracle. And the miracle had come from a woman they had just mocked minutes before. The instructor gave a slow nod, respect clear in his eyes now. "Skill like that doesn't come from ego. It comes from sacrifice." Alyssa finally sat up, cradling the Barrett in her arms, the weight of the rifle resting easy against her shoulder. Her eyes swept across the line of men. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The silence around her was victory enough. One by one, the soldiers straightened. Some gave her a nod. Others avoided her gaze, humbled. But the shift was undeniable. Where there had been laughter, now there was respect. Where there had been doubt, now there was legend. And for the first time, they didn't see a woman with a Barrett. They saw the sniper, who had bent distance itself to her will. The sun dipped lower over the desert, stretching shadows across the range. The line of soldiers stood quiet now, rifles slung, boots planted in the sand. Every eye remained on her, no longer with smirks or doubt, but with something heavier, more enduring. Respect. Alyssa rose slowly from the mat, lifting the Barrett as if it weighed no more than a standard carbine. Dust clung to her elbows and knees, but her posture was tall, steady, unshaken. She walked back toward the waiting crowd, and for the first time since she'd arrived, not a single man dared whisper. The instructor stepped forward, weathered face etched with a new expression. He studied her, then gave a short nod. "Sergeant Ward," he said, voice gruff, "you don't need this range to prove who you are, but I think today, they needed it." Her lips curved into the faintest trace of a smile, but she said nothing. One of the younger soldiers, the same one who had mocked her most loudly earlier, took a hesitant step forward. His voice was quieter now, stripped of arrogance. "I was wrong about you." She met his eyes without anger, only calm. "Don't be sorry. Be better. Out here, underestimating someone can get you killed or worse. Cost your team their lives." The words landed hard. Every soldier present felt the weight of them. Her spotter, who had stood silently at her side through it all, finally spoke up with a grin. "Now you know why no one laughs when she sets up on the line. If you're smart, you'll watch her, you'll learn. Because what she carries isn't just a rifle, it's history." The men glanced at one another, some nodding subtly. The laughter and arrogance that had once filled the range had been replaced by something deeper. They had seen skill, yes, but more than that. They had seen discipline, patience, and a kind of quiet strength that couldn't be faked. The instructor barked an order to resume training, but the mood never returned to what it had been. Every shot fired afterward carried a new weight. Every soldier on that line found themselves stealing glances at her, not with doubt, but with the silent hope that maybe, just maybe, some of her steel would rub off on them. As for Alyssa, she settled the Barrett against her shoulder again, lying back down with the same serenity she had carried from the start. To her, this wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about reminding herself and them what it meant to be a soldier. Legends weren't born from noise. They were carved in silence, in patience, in shots that echoed across valleys and deserts. Her record would remain a number in the books. But for the men on that range, it had become something far greater. A lesson. By the time the last round was fired and the sun had dipped fully below the horizon, Alyssa Ward wasn't just another name in their unit. She was the sniper who had turned doubt into silence. The woman who had taught them all that respect isn't given, it's earned. As the steel targets cooled in the distance, one truth settled over every man who had been there that day. They hadn't just witnessed skill, they had witnessed a legend at work.